Okay, cool. Hi, thanks everybody for taking the time to come out and stuff. I'm super excited for the conversation. I got a couple slides here that I'd love to kind of walk through and give a little bit of background uh, on myself, talk a little bit about kind of some of the challenges that I see, focusing on kind of the small to mid-size organizations and how they implement privacy, and a lot of discussions or ability to kind of ask questions. Feel free to interrupt or just have a conversation afterwards. But as first, I want to start off kind of with a little bit more background and my uh, kind of learning and where I came from. I started off actually started off and graduated from University of Maryland. I was a information systems and finance major. Actually thought I was going to go into like quantitative finance, and started doing stock trading. Ended up making a turn to do cybersecurity. I went to be a cybersecurity engineer at Deloitte. I supported the U.S. Census Bureau with the 2020 census, and led a team of security engineers to secure those systems. And after that, slowly made a transition into privacy. So a lot of my learning experiences come almost exclusively from the job. I then went from bounced around a couple different organizations, primarily looking to be in a role where I was the only privacy engineer at that company. So starting at kind of pre-IPO organizations of around 500 employees, to the most recent full-time stint was with GoFundMe, which has about 800 employees, where I was there as the only kind of privacy engineer supporting that organization. After that, I actually spun off my own consulting company. So now I offer fractional privacy engineering support to a variety of different customers in fintech, Fortune 500 companies, and e-commerce. So I kind of have now provided more kind of fractional privacy support, similar to how maybe a lawyer would provide fractional legal support. I can provide fractional privacy engineering to organizations that might not have the headcount for a full engineer, but still want that expertise. And so pretty much what I want to go through is again my methodology or my approach when I'm going into these organizations, questions that I ask, the types of challenges that I have. I will also note that I was a member of the CMU Privacy Engineering Certification Program, which is how I got introduced to everybody here, kind of running the master's program. I have huge respect for Carnegie Mellon, and I, again, really appreciate everybody for the invitation to come out and speak with you all. I think I'm the first kind of presentation for this seminar series, so hopefully I can set the bar pretty in a good spot. Maybe not super high, but I also saw you have a lot of great presentations later on as well. So excited to kind of jump into that. I don't know how well the microphone is going to pick up, and I know I can't see people if they raise their hands and stuff. But I wanted to open this question up to kind of anybody in the room or anybody in the Slack room as well, because I know we got a couple participants in the Zoom channel. Would love to
I
hear
can
if
call on people from here.
cool. Yeah, that would be great. Would love to hear people's kind of thoughts. And again, I've got some notes, but would love to hear some people's thoughts on challenges for implementing a privacy program at organizations.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I
Can
can
you
hear you.
speak up? Okay. Okay. Yeah.
I worked at a startup for a while and trying to convince people that privacy is important and worth the added cost is impossible. I mean, impossible, right? We have a shoestring budget, so the idea of dedicating extra resources to anything that isn't directly making money. I also, when I worked at a larger company, I saw the same thing, right? Bigger scale, more money, but it's still the same concept of, well, why would we bother, right? It's
Yep.
secure, and therefore, why does it matter?
Also, I should say, please say your name and
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
My name's Rory. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm curious what your experience has been in that regard because I can't convince anybody ever.
Anyone else?
Yep.
Zoom also. What's that?
No. Okay. Well, thanks, Rory. That's a yeah, great point. And we got more opportunities for people to speak back to me, so it's not just a one-way communication. But yeah, that's a great point there. Budget is always going to be a challenge when implementing privacy programs. I think there's obviously conversations always around kind of like this being a cost kind of savings instead of a revenue driving mechanism, and so it's very hard to communicate kind of what the cost savings is or understanding the risk in a way to quantify it enough um to get that budget or to kind of move that needle in the direction. I do see Peter's message, a challenge that I have governed by an independent team, and I'm working on identifying common ground to work on. That is also a great point. So we have budget and we also have kind of this people management portion of it, right? So governed by an independent team, as you'll see later in the presentation, especially when you're working with smaller companies, you are going to be likely interacting with, or I interact with a lot of the like one person that does that thing. There's not a team of people or there's not an ability to kind of spread out resources easily. It is one person that does the marketing efforts for the company. And so yeah, so we have budget, we have people. Um, I
Yes, one
want
more in
to
here. One more. One more.
I wanted to ask, so I also worked as a consultant for a few companies where I was a security consultant, and the primary concern for those companies were that security is a sensitive topic, and they don't want to primarily outsource it, especially when someone who is not a full-time employee. So what I like, it would be a very hard thing for you to sell as a fractional privacy engineer. How did you go about it, convincing them that first, privacy is important, second, that it can be outsourced to a third party who is not on your payroll?
yeah. So yeah, challenge. So I will answer that question as well, but I also want to call out like great point around the yeah, challenge around like the resourcing or head count as well. These are sensitive topics for organizations. And so they sometimes are not willing to outsource that kind of information, or outsource that support. To answer your question kind of directly, yeah, so I think a big thing around um what I've been able to do or my goal is really driving a level of trust with these partners and with these companies. So I focus from like a business strategy perspective, focus on working with legal firms or working with technology vendors. Those legal firms and technology vendors have already built a certain level of trust with the clients. And so by me building the trust with those partners, they're able to bring me on to help answer those questions. So kind of having like a trusted advisor or already within those companies. So that's kind of been my business kind of strategy, and I'm happy to jump into kind of more of that a little bit later on in the discussion, but I didn't want to forget that question. Okay. So recap, we have financial concerns. It's hard to get budget for privacy programs. We have kind of the nature of okay, there might just be one or two people from a bandwidth perspective around. Maybe there's not enough people to, again, if everybody's focused on profit driving solutions, there might not be enough people to focus on some of this privacy work. And then we also have the concern of, hey, maybe these companies don't want to actually outsource this either. Again, looking at resource constraint. Um, so we kind of talked a little bit about, so I think that was kind of the broad kind of perspective. I think there's a lot of risks or a lot of challenges that come into kind of these mid-sized organizations. Again, everybody has different kind of definitions, but I kind of focus on the 500 to 1,000 employees kind of area, large enough for organizations to probably need a privacy program, but they're still just kind of learning about it. So beyond the financial concerns, which I think are similar to the large companies as they are to small companies, beyond the kind of headcount concerns. Anybody else have any ideas of potential like unique challenges for an organization that might have like 500 to 1,000 employees?
Anyone in the room?
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
Hi, it's Rory again.
Yep.
The you're large at that scale. You're large enough that you probably have enough cash flow that you could theoretically afford some kind of program, but also you can't. Or sorry, you don't necessarily have the money to afford a sizable program, but you also can't afford the fees of ignoring it. Whereas a large company can do either or.
Yep. Great call out.
Other folks in the room. Yes.
Hi, I'm Emma. Kind of similarly, you size-wise have like enough employees that you probably should be devoting like time and resources from those employees, but like just enough that they probably all have like very important, critical, potentially specialized roles as well. So you can't necessarily take add additional duties or take one of them away from what they're doing.
Yep. Perfect. Anyone else? One more piece.
Yes. So what I've seen in companies of this size is usually that they have a lot of data coming in and teams are working in their own cohorts where one team is not collaborating with the other, they don't know what the other team is working, and it's the common set of data that everyone is handling. So everyone is pooling data into their databases. So not everyone is, there's not a single source of truth where everyone knows what kind of PI is going into what databases, and there's no labeling and all those kinds of things. So it's a very hard
Yep.
thing because it's knowledge silos are there in each of these codes, so it's a hard thing to manage.
Awesome. No, completely agree. Okay, that's perfect. That's a great jumping off point for us. Um, yeah, so the mid-sized companies, I think everybody touched on this really well. They are in this very awkward state, right? They're like the 13-year-old like just starting puberty, like they're just trying to figure out what they're doing. They've gotten some success, but they haven't like kind of figured out what's going on yet. But they are at this position that's like very risky for them because, as Roy mentioned, like they have enough money to be concerned about the risk, but they also are in the state where the fines and potential ramifications of not complying are becoming too great at this point. The conversation, I think it was Emma mentioned the conversation around a lot of these at this stage you have, like I said, maybe you have the one person that is doing that work, and so you have to try to steal time away from them to do these privacy initiatives. Um, and then you're always going to be competing against the profit incentive or the profit motive for the organization to pull that resource back to kind of profit driving kind of initiatives. And then the last piece, I'm sorry I didn't catch his name, but that is hugely important where the mid-sized company is in a very vulnerable spot where they have a lot of, or potentially they have a lot of data, um, but that data has not been managed or governed properly up to that point. So that data governance and lack of proper controls, the lack of just management around it and the processes can add to a lot of risk for those companies. So that's a really big point around that risk. Another thing that I wanted to kind of call out with these small to mid-sized organizations is a lot of the company culture. Company culture at these smaller companies is a lot stronger than company culture at large organizations. And I did mention, or it was mentioned about kind of maybe having a lot of distributed kind of silos of data. These mid-sized organizations will, in some cases, are just telling their engineers to go off and build something. And so I've worked with companies that have every different type of managed database within AWS because each team wanted to set up their own database service. And so now you have to go through and try to manage and collect all of that. But then when we start working on privacy and that data governance perspective, you have to start kind of reining in some of that culture of the organization, which can lead to personnel or just kind of interpersonal challenges um, that you kind of have to deal with throughout. Okay, great discussion. So, um, I think we all kind of touched on a lot of interesting points. That was really great kind of interaction, and I appreciate that. Um, what I wanted to, and with this slide, I wanted to discuss and look at like as we're looking at some of these problems in privacy or looking at some of these challenges with small business organizations, um, it matters a lot kind of how we frame these conversations and how we frame the questions and the problem statements that we're working on, especially when you're working with smaller companies that might not have the education around data privacy or protection. You might run into people who are less familiar with some of the concepts that we're working on, or just have been in this mode of focusing on their own business and not focusing on kind of the impact later on. So instead of kind of focusing on what the problem that the business is developed, um, we have to kind of reframe some of the problems and some of the concerns that they have around privacy to improve that and to kind of help the adoption of privacy within the organization. So this is kind of the mindset that I kind of come in with for some of these projects is um, there are underlying issues around kind of this front facing concern of like privacy is slowing development, or we hear that in security a lot as well, but the security kind of development life cycle slows down development, or people aren't kind of reaching out to our privacy program when they should be. Those are all kind of problems, and the solutions to that are not like just as straightforward as like, okay, they're not asking questions, so we need to give them a place to ask questions. It's maybe they don't know what questions to really be asking, or how can we kind of look at and reframe this to be kind of this human-centered approach or human-centered design approach to privacy. And so that's kind of the area that I focus on a lot, again, is bringing this to like the people themselves. I'll pause here if there are any questions or if this sparked any discussion within the room.
In the room.
That's fine if not. No. Okay.
Wait, hold on. I actually had one.
Oh, you did? Okay.
So one of the things that you have been describing is sort of privacy as either, earlier on in the conversation you were talking about privacy as sort of a strict like profit loss a little bit. Now you're talking more about sort of privacy in the development process and sort of taking it as a given that this should be worked in. I guess, are there scenarios where privacy isn't just treated as sort of a strict profit loss or like a strict, slow in the development process?
Yeah, I think as we're I'm seeing a lot, especially in these mid-size companies, a lot more organizations trying to think about privacy also as a differentiator or developing privacy into the product so that it enables more kind of business. So allowing them to have the right and proper consents in place allow the organization to potentially do more or operate and process the data um, more effectively or more broadly so that they can use that data and allow them to either profile or give kind of more personalization within their applications and stuff. So there is an area where kind of privacy as this enabling factor allows the business to kind of continue to grow. And I know there's probably a lot of discussion within this room around using or the inefficiencies of gathering consent and the true validity of some of the consents and express consent versus implicit consent. Um, I think a lot of those conversations do as privacy engineers, it's important that we have those conversations, that we push for that. But at the end of the day, I do end up seeing a lot of organizations taking that risk-based approach to um, leveraging privacy as this more or less like differentiator, um, and leveraging it to kind of enable more products, and enable more processing.
Thanks. Anything else from the room over here? Okay.
Cool. Okay. So, problems in privacy. Okay, so this is kind of one area again, when I start looking at these mid-sized organizations, I think we touched on a lot of this and a lot of my customers do focus kind of mostly in the US, but I do work a lot with GDPR and international customers as well. But US privacy laws are changing and evolving. We're adding more and more um, by the year, it seems like. So that's why I have a little asterisk there of I believe it was 18, but the last time I pulled this could have been a couple weeks ago, and it might have changed since then. But essentially, when we look at privacy within small organizations, this right graphic, I tried to call out a lot of the teams that I work with around kind of a small organization. So we have legal, product, engineering, design, business insights, marketing. These are kind of the main company or main organizations or departments that I end up working with within these organizations. And they're all very important to making sure that privacy is actually managed and implemented effectively within the company. And so as we talked about before, a lot of siloed or small teams that might be going off and doing their own thing, making sure that you kind of interact and work with all of them is very important. And a key piece of that is, as I talked about before, that culture element of going to each team and kind of discussing with them or learning about kind of their processes can be very valuable to better understanding kind of how they operate with their data, what's their relationship with the data, um, what are their concerns, or what are things that we can do as a privacy engineer to enable that business or that department to actually have those like insights and thoughts about privacy um, earlier on or kind of throughout their entire work stream. Other piece that I wanted to call out from this slide, and I think this is especially true with the mid-sized organizations, the lack of knowledge within organizations, whether it's directly from it's usually the legal team is very familiar with what the regulations should be. It's usually a breakdown of communication from the legal team to the rest of the organization where requirements to engineering could be mistranslated or not implemented fully, or the kind of current state of the product or solution might not be current state or product of the solution might not be kind of communicated to the legal department as effectively. And so when we have these kind of breakdowns in any one of these kind of chains on the right, you end up having this kind of false sense of security when it comes to privacy. And that's when we see like companies might put up a consent banner, and that consent banner might not effectively conduct an opt-out of like sale of personal data later down in their data stream pipeline. That is where somebody like a privacy engineer is extremely important in these conversations to ensure that the organization is doing what they're expected to do, doing what they are meaning to do as well, or what their intention is. So, believe this gets into kind of my approach. And so I mentioned before that I've been an in-house privacy engineer for a couple of years. And then I started my own kind of company doing this fractional privacy engineering support. And this is kind of the four main pillars of the process and of my methodologies to going to an organization and helping them kind of build out a privacy program. And we're going to kind of walk through each of those. And I actually have kind of case studies or case information from like my experience and how each of these kind of has really enabled my business and enabled like my customers to have better success. So with the integrated privacy approach, first off, starting with analyzing your surroundings. So this is really when it comes to privacy, I think context is incredibly important. I think we can all kind of agree that based on that context, we change kind of how we work with data or how the data is being processed. So what are the main business goals and with just what are the main business goals in general for the organization, and how does that affect the relationship with data? So understanding where organizations are trying to leverage data in their day-to-day or in their business performance, or looking at how they're growing to include data potentially in the future in that work. So one case from a client that I've had is a Fortune 500 company. So they actually, in kind of analyzing and gaining these concepts around kind of like what is the context of the data that we're processing, they ended up having a data categorization policy that ended up being like about 20 pages long. And each page kind of had different tables for the categorizations that they had, and each categorization had its own data elements included and TTLs and security requirements. But understanding, and this was a very large organization that had a lot of different business units, but the context around how they're processing data and the different data subjects that they had led them to developing this full list of data categories that allows them to point out like, okay, this is the specific data subject, this is the specific data element that's being included, and this is the potential location of processing. And so all of that was very important in like developing the context for them around this categorization policy. And I think that is a bring to kind of these small organizations. I think my camera is frozen potentially. Is my audio still coming through?
Your audio is still coming through. Your camera is not only frozen, but also the lights went out, which is something I've never seen in a. There we go.
There you go. Okay.
All right.
The lights in the room didn't go out, but I guess lights on the camera did.
Mysterious.
Um, Okay.
We should be good.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. Okay, so analyzing the surroundings, that's the first thing that I go into this business is asking kind of what are your goals? How does that interact with data and how can we kind of document that or better understand kind of this to give us the context for the future conversations. The next piece that I focus on is just identifying the data. And I know this is probably seems pretty trivial for everybody in the room. And this is a privacy engineering master's program, so I think this is probably identifying the data is probably the first day, or maybe that's a given that everybody knows that you're supposed to do this. But especially in these mid-sized organizations, it is very difficult sometimes. And as I mentioned before, they're at this point where they've grown to a stage that there are a lot of independent silos, and sometimes it's very hard for them to actually develop or pull together a full list of data that they've leveraged or data that's within their system. This is where I've helped a lot of companies, including a financial technology platform, implement data categorization or data discovery solutions. And so identifying and just knowing what data you have is kind of this first step in building out like kind of some of the other regulatory requirements around kind of where is your data going or what is your like records of processing activity. This is pretty much like the first step to any of that. And I think this whole list and stuff is really important to recognize that some companies need to start from this kind of ground one or base level to really kind of start building up their privacy program. So like I said, financial technology company that I've been working with, they needed to go through a data categorization effort and data discovery effort. Um, it is they've been around for I think about 7 or 8 years, and it is they've been continuing to kind of grow. And their team, as expected, they started off as kind of a startup and are now in a position where they really want to and need to know kind of where all their data is going. And even though it's financial technology and they have a lot of like know your customer or KYC data, um, they also have a lot of data that needs to be obviously deleted, and their current processes are very so going through and identifying all this data kind of required us to identify all of the SaaS solutions or all the cloud solutions, identify all of the managed databases that they had within Snowflake and AWS, and then also review any of their on-prem systems from back in the day when they were doing some on-prem work as well. Um, and so this ended up with, I think, around like 1.3 million data elements kind of captured throughout their entire technology stack, which is a fairly sizable amount, and is definitely a lot when you have to go through and try to categorize it. So that is kind of just a key piece, or as we look through and better understanding, like just identifying your data, as we discussed before, can be conversations around risk as well. So knowing now that we have so many data values or so many um, personal data elements within your tables and within your data systems allows us to have better conversations around how do we really assess this risk. Okay, I'm going to try to power through the rest of these so that we got some questions at the end and room for that. Um, Acknowledging your risks, I think that is kind of the next step. So as I mentioned, developing kind of the understanding. We have the context, and now we have the data that's within the systems. The next piece is really acknowledging the risks and how does this company compare to other standards, or compared to the standards in the industry as well as like kind of other organizations. Um, what I look at in solving problems for these mid-sized companies is you have if the boat for if the boat, for instance, is sinking, you have to first kind of stop the water from coming in, and then you have to bail out the water that already got in. And so when we talk about, again, resource constraints, concerns with getting things done or budgets and stuff, that's kind of where I focus on. So stopping the current flow of either systems or documenting anything new that's coming in as we start working on the historic data and as we start working on historic processes or systems. Consumer technology company was one that I worked with. They again came in with very little privacy impact assessments or um, privacy documentation. And it was a manual effort to work with each of these kind of engineering teams. And I took a probably very similar, I would say like a GRC approach to going through and documenting each of the systems and documenting each kind of subsystem or component within those systems. So, for instance, like an identity platform would be its own risk assessment and assessment around the identity platform, and then other tools that leverage that identity platform would then assume the risk of the identity platform. So looking at how you can kind of cut and separate out unique segments of the technology helps to really pinpoint down for small companies kind of where the issues are and how that issue, again, from a risk perspective, kind of populates throughout the organization. And then my last one here, enabling champions. So this is the last kind of point, is really we've talked about before, resource constraints, and also being either the solo privacy engineer at GoFundMe, or being the solo privacy engineer at other companies. I see this at small companies, I see this at large enterprise organizations, but it's all about trying to empower other business units to enable them and get them to think about privacy and include privacy within their processes. So whether that's developing or sitting down and working with the marketing team to understand like how do you guys operate traditionally? Like how can I develop resources that you guys would use, whether it's a flow chart or a full kind of document write up on privacy risks within marketing. How can we document and enable you guys to better understand the privacy risks that your specific organization and your business unit has um, within the company? And that was really the main kind of focus that I had at GoFundMe when I was there as a solo privacy engineer. I would come in and work with the data analytics team specifically within their technology and helping them better understand like how to do data categorization or limiting the data elements that they were kind of processing. And then I would go and work with a marketing team that I would need to develop, like I said, a workflow or a flow chart to help them better understand the differences between a transactional email and a marketing email and when it's all right to send certain types of data through those processes. So I think all of this or all my goal in kind of having this conversation and bringing these kind of points up to the company or kind of to the seminar, sorry, is to give you all kind of more context around what these small and mid-sized organizations are really struggling with, and what their challenges are and how I've been trying to support them. Um, I think having these discussions, like I said, around privacy by design, or the theoretical limits around data anonymization is super fun and super like insightful. But when a lot of you kind of graduate or think about going into privacy engineering, whether it's at a startup or other companies, there are a lot of personal or interpersonal concerns, cultural concerns that organizations have that are stopping them from kind of reaching this privacy engineering or stopping kind of privacy program development. And as much as it is for a privacy engineer like myself to come in and build a solution, that solution falls flat if it doesn't have the right amount of buy-in, or people who really care about what we're doing at those companies, especially when it comes to small organizations that don't have the resources, and that have challenges around just trying to focus resources through profit. So yeah, that's my little pitch and conversation, but would love to take, I think I have another 15 minutes or so to answer questions, or just have a broader discussion, and happy to touch on any of the things that I've brought up kind of previously as well.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you, Jake. All right. There's a question from Aman in the chat. Do you see a common thread of problems to consult on across these organizations beyond embedding it into developer workflows? Also, have AI regulations had some major impact or had some impact?
Yeah, so common threads beyond just embedding developer workflows. I mean, every organization that I work with has a very unique set of problems when it comes to like their technology stack. I think not just embedding into developer workflows, but also ensuring that we have kind of captured the entire technology stack, is very important. And also, as I mentioned, around like the problems and common threads around like the culture of the company, and trying to really empower the organization to be like strong data stewards. Another thread that I usually try to pull on is a lot of organizations focus on data as kind of being this profit motive, or data being profitable, but they fail to realize that data also has risk. And so being able to measure, calculate, or present that value to risk kind of ratio, is very important in having these conversations with companies, as well. AI has obviously been a hot topic. I tried to keep. I think there's probably going to be a lot of seminars, and everybody will see a lot of discussions around AI and privacy. Um, there a lot of mid-sized organizations are starting to kind of experiment with AI, and it depends on the leadership's comfort level with it, how quickly they are adopting. I've had some organizations that are very against AI and don't wish to work with any AI, and have locked down any use of it for employees. And I also have larger customers who are developing their own LLM models around privacy, and around just various user interface kind of support as well, and developing and assessing the risks for those AI components, can be very challenging.
Questions from the audience. Here. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Jake. Yes, here. I had a question that you said sometimes companies misinterpret the privacy policies and things. If you're called into that kind of situation, what would your approach be, and what would the workflow be in that case?
Yeah. So question around like kind of misinterpreting privacy policies, or potentially, I think, like if I can extrapolate that out to like misinterpreting privacy regulations,
Yeah.
in general. And I think, as a privacy engineer, my goal, or when I go to engage with these companies, I tend to tell them that I am definitely not a legal expert, and I point them to their external counsel to make sure that they have the counsel is recommending or giving them the right kind of support. But when it comes to how I kind of operate with supporting them, is really focused on what is the organization's kind of overall goal, and how does that goal, or how does the missions and values of the organization kind of align, or really contradict, in some cases, the privacy policy, or what the organization or what the team is trying to do. So it's really about trying to also like personalize a lot of this. So instead of like if somebody's asking about trying to target users based on like geolocation or targeting users based on like age or something, really asking like how would you feel if that was kind of yourself or your own data. And that does make I have found a lot of success in kind of personalizing that, especially when it comes to like anonymization and personalizing kind of those discussions as well.
Got it. Thanks.
Other questions from the audience, especially from people who have not asked yet. Yes.
Hi, I'm Zoe. You mentioned siloed teams. Have you ever tried to implement cross-functional teams? So, including like the legal person, marketing person, engineering, like all together, just to help with that like communication?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think overall, I don't think the privacy industry as a whole has really identified kind of where privacy engineering should really sit within an organization. I see people sitting under the engineering department, under the legal department, under product. They do kind of span a lot of different areas. When it comes to kind of like a cross-functional team, kind of like what you mentioned, I think that really aligns very closely with kind of what I see a privacy champions kind of program looking like within these smaller organizations. When we talk about enabling each business unit to be comfortable either understanding privacy or in some cases even making privacy decisions on their own, that's really where we start building those, like you said, cross-functional teams of let's meet like once a week. We have people from the engineering, like finance engineering team. We have people from a different engineering kind of business area, or we have back end engineering, and then we also have our front end marketing team who we can all come together in like a weekly meeting or discuss kind of the different concerns that are coming up. And it's really about, like I said, enabling those business areas to kind of make some of those decisions on their own. And so that's been a big value or an area that I think is super good to kind of look.
Questions from the chat?
Yeah, sure.
Uh,
Um,
couple actually. So I'm not. So there's one. I know we're all privacy engineers, but should a founder really care about privacy while developing their base product? Like, will it be economical for a founder to incorporate privacy from day one, or they can worry about privacy once they become a mid-sized firm? And then I'll do the follow-up question after that.
yeah, I think that's a really interesting, and I think there have been I forget exactly who said it, but I believe there was like a pretty big either founder or a startup incubator that told kind of their startup teams to not care about regulation and just build and then focus on regulation later, or focus on the ethics later. And I'm paraphrasing. Um, I think to me it comes down to kind of like what type of organization you want to be. And it might not be the whole you might not need to do the entire gambit of developing a full privacy organization, but especially when you're a founder thinking about how can I have some structure within the company to allow for some of these privacy regulations or privacy concerns that come up in the future to be much more easily implemented. Really, the question for me to the founder would be, are you all right not are you all right paying a couple of $1,000s now to not have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars later to bring your organization up to speed? And it really depends on, again, like you said, how economical that might be for the founder or what stage of startup that looks like. But that is from
Oop, we might have lost you again.
those organizations are kind of getting themselves into is because they did the grit.
Jake, would you mind
Lost
pausing
me.
and restarting your camera
Yep.
again?
Okay. Sorry. Oh,
I think we lost a bit
my
of the
bad.
last couple of sentences there.
Okay. I'm closing my camera, and that might. Okay. Opening it back up. Um, Last couple sentences there was really that's where I'm seeing a lot of these mid-sized organizations are having the trouble is that they have to now go back and pay potentially even more now, obviously, to fix the challenges that they had before, versus it might be a very small cost for some of these startups to just consider or think about earlier on. And I think the follow-up is privacy policy sometimes gives a false sense of security. Can you give an example of that? I think the false sense of security, either it's privacy policies or privacy procedures, I would say, so not just like the privacy notice on the web page, and that might have been my misspeak. But a big sense of that, I would say, I am not a huge proponent or not a huge fan of the OneTrust platform, and I think there is a sense of security that organizations have when they look to implement specific technology, and that technology actually gives them options to have kind of dark patterns within their kind of privacy framework. So I know there are a lot of configurations kind of within the consent management position or within the consent management module within OneTrust that are considered either dark patterns or just not good privacy practice. And also the from sometimes from like a sales perspective, tools might promise a certain level of privacy protection, but not actually meet that standard. And so it's important to have that privacy engineer to come in and really either fact check or prove whether the technology is doing what they say to do or what they're saying that they're doing.
Any questions from folks who haven't already asked a question before we do one more from the chat? Okay, so from the chat, can you talk about how you quantify profit cost to risk ratio? Is it based on regulations? Is it based on FTC fines, lawsuits, or is it something else?
Yeah, it's and I see Frank has raised his hand in the Zoom
Oh,
as well, so I want to make sure I'll get to
I didn't
his
see that.
question.
Sorry.
But yeah, the doing the profit cost to risk ratio is an entire other probably seminar as well. It is very challenging, and generally it sticks to um, either trying to like leveraging a lot of outside resources, leveraging I think KPMG does a cost of a data breach, and they put in a lot of great numbers every year around that. Or maybe that's Verizon, and apologies if I'm mixing the two programs or two pieces together, but it comes down to really the individual company and how they monitor and assess risk as well. So it's a very kind of bespoke process right now. Nobody has a clear way to kind of quantify that. So I'll give the full consulting answer of it depends, and have a discussion kind of later on that. Uh,
Okay, Frank?
yeah.
Uh, hey Jay, thanks for coming to talk with us today. My question was kind of in a similar vein. It seems like if you have like a mature privacy program and things are going well, people think it's kind of magic and not aware of all the things that are kind of going on behind the scenes. And so to me, I kind of visualize it as you have to learn how to measure a negative. And you mentioned a couple of ways of measuring that with the risk ratio, or do you want to spend a couple $1,000s now or a couple $100,000 later? And I was wondering if you had any other techniques or tactics for telling that story or measuring the success of a privacy program, especially to people who aren't very knowledgeable about privacy.
That's a great question. I mean, all the questions have been great. This is probably the one that I'm gonna need to think about on, and I'm happy to give you a better answer, but you put me on the spot with a really tough one. I think so we have the risk profit to uh cost to risk ratio, other measures of like how to show that the program is working or that the program's doing well. I think another key piece is around potentially like engagement. So when I talk about the champions or developing these processes, how often are those processes being used? Can we have like metrics around how many privacy reviews that we're doing? There's one client that I have who I get about 50 privacy review requests a week. So that's me going in and looking at product design documents, building automation to like they asked a great question, but maybe that question is very low risk. And so we just say like, yeah, whatever you think, because we know that the data that you're using is not actually like it's public data, so we don't care about it. So building automation to kind of slow or reduce that number of 50 reviews a week down to a more manageable amount. Um, but yeah, so looking at those kind of metrics around the success of engagement within a program, I think is really interesting. Um, and I think also either time, I think it gets down to a lot of like time as well. So like how quickly an organization is able to respond to a privacy incident, or looking at just the overall amount of privacy incidents, whether it's somebody sent an email to the wrong email address or clicked on a phishing link. Those can also be kind of privacy incidents as well. Um, there are little kind of other metrics around there to kind of show the value. But like you said, and I think that is a big key of this is a still in a lot of cases a cost savings measure, and so it is hard to quantify full risk or full value. But yeah, great question, and again, great discussion.
Okay, any last short questions from the audience? Okay, let's thank the speaker. All right, well, thank you once again, Jake. Oh, it looks like you have a stay in touch slide. I'll let you introduce
Yep.
your stay in
Yeah.
touch slide.
Yeah, I just wanted to yeah, again, I really appreciate Carnegie Mellon team and everybody for inviting me out for the seminar. I believe the QR code goes right to my LinkedIn, and I also have my personal website, or for my business website as well. I really the program is awesome. Great luck, good luck to everybody kind of in this, and I really appreciate you guys including me kind of in a small part in this seminar series.